grade 12 economics, please diploma. I'm back here with you to take you on economic pursuit under economics. The topic under economic pursuit we are covering today is economic growth and development, and the subtopics are economic growth and development as well as demand side approach. So please join me. Remember, the content we are doing is for paper 1. Where in paper 1, this is the part of our question 1. The question 3, the whole of question 3 will be the economic pursuit, a part of question 4 as well as question 6 in our question paper. So please join me. Let's see what we have in the pocket for you. The following are the lesson objectives or outcomes that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. So at the end of this lesson, you as a candidate will be able to do the following. It will allow you to differentiate between economic growth and economic development. The lesson will allow you to be able to briefly discuss measures of economic growth and those of economic development. The lesson will also allow you to discuss in detail the demand side approach to economic growth and economic development. As for grade 11 content, it is believed that you already know the following. Economic growth concept as covered in grade 11, constraints to economic growth, economic development concept, measures of economic development. The body of the lesson is as follows. We have economic growth and development under economic pursuit. And the first thing to be discussed, or the content to be discussed, is economic growth. And then we have a demand side approach, which is the long question and the essay. We have economic development being discussed. And then we also have supply side approach, but it won't be covered in this lesson. The following are the basic concepts that will assist you to understand this lesson. The firstly, economic growth. We say economic growth is the increase in economic activities of the country, or you can also say it is the increase in the productive capacity of the country, or the increase in the production of goods and services in the country. You can also say is the increase in the real GDP of the country. And then economic development. Economic development is defined as the improvement of social welfare or social well-being, or improvement of standard of living for people or for country's citizens. Real GDP. Real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation, or GDP figures where inflation has been considered or taken into account. And then nominal GDP refer to GDP figure that has not been adjusted for inflation. Remember, real GDP figures are also known as GDP at constant prices or base year prices, while nominal GDP is also known as the current GDP figures. Life expectancy refers to number of years that a person is expected to live from birth to death. GDP per capita. This is the total receivable income by each citizen of working population, when the real GDP is divided by working population. We continue with the terminology. Land restitution. This is the economic redress policy focused on compensating those who lost their land forcefully through oppressive policies. Land redistribution is the economic redress policy focused on giving back land for residential purposes and productive use. The progressive tax system is the tax system used when low-income earners are taxed less than high-income earners. And then wealth taxes. These are taxes imposed on the sale of assets. Cash benefits refer to transfers made by the government to social members to ensure social security and social welfare. Benefits in kind. These are free benefits extended by the state to citizens to improve their welfare. Property subsidies, as we continue with terminology, are subsidies on the purchase of houses by the government or by the state to encourage individuals' ownership. Demand side approach involve policies or decisions by the government based on monetary policy and fiscal policies with the aim of changing the level of aggregate demand in the economy. Supply-side approaches refers to decisions by the government and policies or measures used to ensure the improvement or stimulation of the aggregate supply within the economy. Employment Equity Act. It is the redress policy or act which prohibits discriminatory actions in the workplace based on gender, race, or disability, etc. The broad-based Black economic empowerment is the economic redress policy introduced to promote participation of former marginalized people in the economic mainstream. Deregulation. This is the removal of unnecessary laws and regulations that restrict or prohibit efficiency of markets. Privatization is the transfer of ownership from the public sector to the private sector, or public ownership to the private ownership. The capital formation is the increase in the capital stock of the country. Human resources refer to all mental and physical effort exerted and is traded on the labor market for wages and salaries. Then economic growth. So this is the description coming back again. We said economic growth is the increase in economic activities of the country, or increase in the productive capacity of the country, or increase in the production of goods and services in the economy. We know that economic growth is measured quarterly by the government, and stats is made available by State SA as well as South African Reserve Bank. So if economic activities increase, economic growth is likely to increase. The increase in investments, employment opportunities, aggregate demand on goods and services, new industrial establishments, and the production of goods and services stimulates economic growth. So if all of these components are increasing in the economy, there will be indeed economic growth in the economy. How do we measure economic growth? Economic growth is measured through real GDP. We know that it is necessary for the nation to measure economic growth to determine welfare of economic activity. So it is very important for the state or the government to measure economic growth and see how are the growth trends, so that it will be able to make necessary predictions for the future of the economic performance. So nominal GDP is then converted to real GDP, where inflation will be removed so that economic growth can be measured. Nominal GDP, remember, is the GDP at current prices, GDP figures, which contain an inflation effect. Economic growth is measured through the real GDP. Real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation, meaning inflation effect has been removed in the real GDP, so that there can be a simple measurement of economic growth to see trends if they are improving or not improving. So to calculate economic growth, we say economic growth equals to nominal GDP minus real GDP over real GDP multiplied by 100. Then you will discover economic growth rate of the country for that particular period of time. Why is it important to have economic growth, or why is economic growth important for the nation? Economic growth is very much necessary because it is a source of economic development. Remember, we normally say it is impossible to achieve economic development without having economic growth. So the nation or the country must have economic growth first before we have economic development. However, we also emphasize that it is not guaranteed that if we experience economic growth, there will be obviously economic development. When more goods and services are produced, the demand for labor increases, which stimulate job creation. We know that with more goods and services being made available in the economy, then that will increase the demand for labor, because consumers will be demanding more goods and services, and that will stimulate job creation or job opportunities, which will reduce unemployment. Economic growth results in an increase in spending capacity, which stimulates the multiplier effect. As economic growth is positive, that will lead to more spending in the economy, which will always bring about the multiplier effect within the economy. Economic growth creates a good environment for investment. If the country is experiencing economic growth, that economic growth attracts investors to flow into the economy and invest the most. Countries or FDIs are not willing to invest in the vulnerable economy, where economy doesn't grow. We continue with the importance. With economic growth, tax revenues for the state will always increase, caused by high employment, high spending, and more profits by businesses. This improves the provision of public goods and services in the economy. So with the government being able to achieve much of tax revenues, that will lead to more government spending, which is more about the provision of public goods and services in the economy that is informed by the economic growth. So economic growth has a great effect on social stability. If ever there is economic growth, it is rare that you come across high level of crime, a high level of poverty, because people will be receiving income, people will be able to sustain themselves. Therefore, being engaged in criminal activities will be less, and poverty will be alleviated with economic growth, because most of people of the nation will be employed and receiving income to spend on goods and services. For economic growth to create enough employment opportunities, it must increase faster than the population growth rate. Yes, for us to experience the pure economic growth that will be able to create more opportunities in the economy, then the economic growth should be increasing, or should increase faster than the population growth, because if the population increases more than economic growth, that will mean the growth in the economy that does not create enough opportunities for the population, because the population is increasing faster than the economic growth. Therefore, it is necessary for the country to notice or to measure if the economic growth that has been recorded over the past quarter is increasing at the faster rate or at the lower rate than the population growth rate, so that it will be able to create enough opportunities for those people in the economy. So economic growth focuses on the following: improving GDP of the country, the gross domestic product measures, the total value of all final goods and services produced within the country at a given period of time, usually a year. So the main focus is to improve GDP, and then GDP is regarded as the economic barometer that measures economic growth. GDP is the one that we use to measure the level of economic growth, because as GDP increases, automatically we can predict to see that in the near future we will come across improved economic growth. To assess economic growth, inflation must be removed from nominal GDP, converting it to real GDP. We have said that before, to say to assess if the economic growth is evident, we need to remove the effect of inflation. Hence, we use base year prices or previous year prices when we calculate economic growth. Economic growth is more accurate when it is measured through the real GDP, because it does not contain any inflationary effect. The South African economic growth trends. So we check over the past years and past quarters, how has been South African economic growth? So this is presented graphically to say, we check from 2006 to 2019, how was economic growth of the country? We can see we recorded the highest growth in 2006, which was 5.6%, and then it dropped to 5.4% in 2007. It dropped drastically to in 2008 to 3.2%, and then in 2009, it dropped to, it declined negatively, so because it became negative 1.5%. In 2010, it slightly increased from then to 3%, and then 2011 increased slightly to 3.3%. 2012, it declined to 2.2%. 2013, it increased slightly to 2.5%, and then 2014 decreased to 1.8%, and 2015 decreased to 1.2%. 2016 decreased to 0.4%. 2017, it increased slightly to 1.4%. 2018 decreased to 0.8%, and 2019 drastically declined also to 0.2%. So these are the trends of economic growth in South Africa from 2006 to 2019. Let's check the next trend. So this arrow indicates the decline in economic growth trends over these past years. And then let's check the next slide to see that is 2020. This is the year where the country recorded the highest economic growth ever, which was negative 7%. And then you can see that most of industries in the economy recorded the decline in the economy. We had agriculture increasing, it's positive to 13.1%, government 0.7%, the rest declined. Remember, in 2020, the country was facing the severe COVID-19, whereby economic activities were not functional, some of them were blocked. So hence, we came across this drastic decline in economic activities. And then we go further to check the 2021. In 2021, we recorded 4.9% growth. So you can see that those regulations that were there for COVID-19 were eased or relaxed, then economic activities were back a little bit to normal. Hence, we recorded the increase in economic activities. You can only see that only construction recorded negative growth in terms of economic activities. So there was a growth. You can see the arrow pointing out. And then this is the 2022 growth trend. So it only reflects first quarter of 2022. We can see that most of industries also show that the increase in economic activities from here going down there, they improve. But going down there, we have construction that also remained negative, and then mining and quarrying remained negative. But it's promising that we will be coming across the better economic activities as we go forward. So this is only for first quarter of 2022. The success and the failure of economic growth in South Africa. How successful has been economic growth in South Africa? So since year 2006, as for the trends we have seen, South African economic growth has been indicating declining positive growth. So the economy has been declining, not being very much positive, because the highest growth we had before 2021, it was 5.6%. The highest growth of 5.6% in 2006 and prominent 4.9% in 2021 are South African remarkable economic growth trends that we have noticed. The use of monetary policy has been quite assertive in stimulating the economy during unforeseen conditions such as COVID-19. We noticed that the Reserve Bank was very much useful on lowering interest rate to accommodate people to be able to ease the burden on their cost and on their repayment of debt within the economy. Export promotion has been effective on promoting local products and industries in international markets. So that have added a certain positive impact into the economic growth trend. And then import substitution policy has managed to safeguard local industries and produces against the global unfair competition. Industrial development policies have managed to attract foreign direct investment through foreign investment grants. So the foreign investment grant has been used to attract foreign investors to flow into South Africa and invest, so that there will be improvement in industrial base of the country, especially under manufacturing. The failure of economic growth. South Africa's current economic growth is facing the very challenging factor. It is not sustainable, and economic growth has stagnated. Unemployment is rising up, and inequality remains very, very high, while economic growth is declining at the same time. So since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, South Africa has recorded drastic changes in economic growth trends. The intense economic slump of -7% in 2020 indicated the worst ever economic decline in South Africa. We continue with the failure. South African economic growth has failed to create opportunities for great employment and reduce inequalities. We have seen that inequalities in South Africa keep on increasing in a yearly basis. So that means our economic growth trends are not enough to create enough opportunities to fight inequality and create opportunities for everyone in the economy to participate in the economic mainstream. Small businesses have not been supported through public procurement. Late payments by governments to small businesses remain as a major concern because they are not receiving funding on time. Development finance has not been made more accessible to new entrants by the Industrial Development Corporation. We continue with the failure. The country has ignored long-term growth attempts such as educational opportunities and skill development in critical fields in labor market. So as much as skill development has been in place, but those critical ones have not been well invested in. Hence, the country is still facing the challenge of not being very much innovative and creative because we borrow most of things or most of the capital abroad or most of technology abroad. This has resulted to an increase in dependence to foreign countries for critical skills. South African economic growth trends have failed to create sustainable job opportunities for countries' workforce. So, in this case, the economic growth of the country have not created enough job opportunities for the labor market. That means our economic growth really is not very much effective looking at our population size. Most of people in the country are unemployed. We are standing at 35% of unemployment rate. So that means the economic growth that we achieve is very much likely to do what? To create opportunities for those people that are unemployed, for those people that are marginalized in the economy. Employment rate remains at 65%, while the unemployment remains at 35% as we speak right now. Then the economic development. Remember, if we talk of economic development, we mainly focus on those social aspects and economic aspects that are necessary to ensure that people's lives are improved. It's all about improving one's well-being or one's welfare. That's when people have access to basic needs in the society. So it is very important that the government make the provision of basic needs into the society, such as provision of housing, sanitation, electricity is very important. Those key aspects of the economy must be made available for the people to easily afford the basic living. But if those basic things are not made available, then the development of the society is compromised by the government. So remember, it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that people's lives are well improved. People are living above the poverty line. Jobs should be created by the government, since we know that full employment is one of macroeconomics objectives. The government should make infrastructure available in all locations, including rural areas in South Africa. And then housing is one of those basic things that are necessary for the nation, for people to live the better life. Those basic needs should be made available into the economy and the society, so that people can live the better life and within the better or civilized standards of living. So economic development is the improvement of social welfare or improvement of the standard of living or well-being for countries' citizens. Hence, I'm saying here, it's well-being or welfare of countries' citizens. If people are having improved welfare or well-being, that means they are having better living standards. They have access to basic needs. They have access to education, healthcare. They are trained. Those people are employed. So that can lead to economic development. Also, they have variety of choices available in the economy and in the society. For effective social welfare to occur, the economic growth must create enough opportunities or employment opportunities for citizens. So people should access those opportunities being made available because of the economic growth. Then we can say there is economic development. So the government has a major impact on securing people's economic development. That is achieved through efficient provision of basic needs, like I said before, such as housing, water supply, electricity, social infrastructure, and economic infrastructure. It is very important that the government make the provision of the social infrastructure. Remember, if we talk of the social infrastructure, we talk about the availability of schools, clinics, libraries, city parks, roads, etc. Those are very important to improve the welfare of the society. Also, economic infrastructure is very important because in that case, they create economic activities within the country. They create job opportunities within the country. So it's very important to ensure that these kinds of the infrastructure and these basic needs are made available into the economy and the society for the sake of economic development and economic welfare. The United Nations uses Human Development Index, which is HDI, to measure economic development. So the following measures are used to measure if the country is having improved economic development or is less developed. So we have life expectancy, which I have defined before to say refers to the average number of years that a person is expected to live from birth to death. And then education. This is all about the expected and average years of schooling concerned with adults who can read and write. And then real income per capita or GDP per capita. In this case, we talk about the income receivable by the working population whenever real GDP is divided by the working population. So this will only occur if income is distributed equally within the country. The standard of living. In this case, we talk about social welfare or social well-being. Remember what informs the standard of living. It is the provision of basic needs. Also, job creation or employment to allow people to earn a certain income for them to afford their basic life. The focus of economic development. Basic needs for all countries' citizens. It is very important to ensure that basic needs are made available for everyone. Improving human resource development, ensuring that people are well trained and skilled. People are having access to basic healthcare so that they can be productive citizens. They can be useful citizens economically. It is very important. Development through educational opportunities, skills and training, as well as access to basic healthcare is very important for the sake of economic development. Improving citizens' freedom, meaning ensuring that people are having economic and social freedom. As for economy, people are having access to a variety of goods and services available in the society, allowing them freedom of choice through variety of opportunities in the society. Making social and economic infrastructure available to everyone. It is very important for the state or the government to provide the infrastructure so that people can be able to live better lives. The availability of this infrastructure, remember, can create even job opportunities. Availability of this infrastructure can make people to live under better conditions because it goes with the provision of basic needs. So service delivery as a main is very important to ensure that economic development is cemented and is achieved within the society. So this is the demand side approach. In this case, we look at What can be done to ensure that the demand is improving, or the aggregate demand is improving, so that it can inform economic growth? Remember that whenever people are demanding more goods and services in the economy, that will automatically lead to economic growth. Because we start here. If there is more aggregate demand in the economy, I will use chain of events. If aggregate demand is increasing, that will lead to what? That will push producers to produce more goods and services. So, with more aggregate demand, then there will be the greater desire for employment, or for labor force. So, businesses will employ more workers. So, employment will be increasing because consumers are demanding more. Because of that, again, there will be more production in the economy if ever there is more of labor force being utilized in the economy. So more production will simply inform increased in gross value added. With more gross value added in the economy, what will happen? And then the GDP of the country will be increasing. And then because of that, we can come across economic growth. And then we know that economic growth informs economic development. So it is very important for the government to ensure that practices or strategies to improve the demand for goods and services is implemented, or are implemented, to ensure that people are able to demand goods and services, so that within the economy we come across what we call an economic growth. So the demand side approach goes with the monetary policy, or the monetary measures and fiscal measures. Remember, if we talk about the monetary measures, I normally say most of our topics we do in economics are having the effect of fiscal policy and the monetary policy. So it comes back again here in this topic, whereby we will be discussing based on the monetary policy, which is controlled by or administered by the South African Reserve Bank, with its main objective to stabilize prices and maintain money supply within the economy. So, in there, we will be talking about monetary policy instruments, which include repo rate or repurchase rate, also cash reserve or reserve requirement ratio, open market transaction, as well as moral persuasion or moral suasion or credit control or moral pressure. And then we'll move again to see how can the Department of Finance make use of the fiscal policy to ensure that we come across increased demand within the economy. That's when we talk about the likes of the what we call the government expenditure, as well as the use of taxation. All kinds of taxes that are applicable in the economy will be discussed. So from then we'll be talking about some other methods used by the government to achieve what we call the economic growth within the economy. So this is the demand side approach. Follow me, let's see what we have for you. So the demand side approach involves decisions and policies that goes together with the change in monetary and fiscal policy with the aim of changing the level of aggregate demand in the economy. It's all about those policies and those approaches which are used to influence the changes in fiscal policy and the monetary policy for the sake of influencing aggregate demand in the economy. It focuses on all measures that can stimulate the total demand in the economy. This is an approach that focuses on aggregate demand created by households, businesses, as well as the government. So these economic stakeholders are the ones that are in the center of this demand side approach. When aggregate demand increases, it stimulates businesses to increase output, which in turn can increase employment opportunities and improve the standard of living of people in the country. That simply means, as we try to improve the demand in the economy, that can lead to the improved living standards, meaning it goes with the economic development at the same time. According to the international best practices, developing countries should run their economies in such a way that they can create economic growth. It is very much important that each country run its economy to the point that it can be able to create economic growth, so that the nation can be able to develop and improve. The proceeds of growth should be used to create social transformation, human capital formation, and redistribution of income. So money received or income received through economic growth must be used for the transformation of the society, human resource development, capital formation in the economy, as well as redistribution in the economy, so that inequalities can be reduced. The well-accelerated economic growth or aggregate demand is an incentive to businesses to produce more to meet demand. So this is known as the crowding out effect. This simply means that if consumers are demanding more goods and services, they are putting producers under pressure to produce more goods and services, which will then increase economic growth. So the main focus is on what we call the demand side to improve economic growth. However, this also increases the aggregate supply in the economy. Hence, we call this one a crowding out effect. It is therefore important to keep the demand high. The demand very, very high within the economy, since it determines the supply of goods and services. So if the demand is low, there will be also a low supply, because producers normally supply based on the demand. They look at market forces before they supply goods and services. So the demand will always inform the supply then. So it is important to ensure that the demand on goods is well improved, so that it will simply inform the supply positively in the economy. So this is the monetary approach. So basically, monetary policy. We know that monetary policy is the policy by Reserve Bank, which is mainly aiming at influencing interest rate to stabilize or control money supply as well as prices within the economy. It is there to ensure that prices are not increasing beyond the target. The monetary policy approach consists of decisions by the central bank as a part of the monetary authorities to influence interest rates and money supply in the economy by implementing inflation target set by the state, which is between 3 to 6%. The central bank manages the availability of money by means of open market transaction and cash reserve requirements. So the state uses monetary policy instruments to control the availability of money in the economy, which is believed to be a money supply. So 4 instruments are used. It is what we call the open market transaction, cash reserve requirement, repurchase rate, as well as the moral pressure or moral coercion. Monetary policy approach focus on manage the cost of money. The cost of money by means of interest rates. We know that the Reserve Bank simply control interest rate so that it can affect the cost of money. Money can be expensive or cheap, meaning credits or loans can be expensive or cheap based on the interest rate. Like yesterday, interest rates were increased by 75 basis points. Variation in the level of interest rate increase or decrease the cost of credit and determine the quantity of money through the working of money multiplier. So with the change in interest rate, there's always an effect straight on what? Straight on the credit can either become cheap or expensive. If it becomes expensive, there will be less money supply. If it becomes cheap, there will be more money supply, because it leads to more credit creation and people tend to borrow money and spend in the economy. Variations of exchange rates for the purpose of the changing of trade, in terms of trade, are used as an auxiliary method to bring about the changes in the stock of money. So the exchange rate alone has a greater impact on the change in the stock of money. And then controlling repo rate. We know that repo rate is the interest rate charged by whom? By Reserve Bank to commercial banks on their borrowings. To affect interest rate, the commercial banks can offer for 2 purposes. Number 1, to influence credit creation by making credit more expensive or cheaper. If ever the repo rate is influenced, it affects all other interest rates, excluding the fixed interest rate or real interest rates. So, if ever the Reserve Bank influence what we call the repo rate or repurchase rate, the credit can either be expensive or cheap. So if ever the interest rate have been increased, credit become expensive, less loans will be taken, there will be lower demand on goods and services. And then if ever interest rate has been lowered, that will mean other interest rate will also decrease. That will lead to more credit creation. People will be borrowing more money from commercial banks, and also commercial banks will borrow more money from Reserve Bank, which will increase the quantity of money in the economy or in the circulation. That will lead to more aggregate demand, because with more money available, people are always tempted to spend in the economy. Stabilize exchange rates by encouraging capital flows or inflows and outflows in order to take care of deficit or surpluses on the current account of the balance of payments. We know that with the higher interest rate, that will always lead to what? More inflow of foreign indirect investors. But with interest rate being lower, that will lead to what? Local consumers really demanding more of the credit and demanding more of imported goods and services, which will create further deficit in the current account. Interest rates are directed by changes in repo rate. We know that all of these other interest rates are affected by the change in repurchase rate or repo rate. And then we continue. we talk about now open market transaction. Remember that open market transaction is all about selling or buying financial securities or bonds in the open market. So to restrict bank credit, the South African Reserve Bank sells securities or financial securities, and when banks buy these securities, the money is taken back from what? From the circulation to the South African Reserve Bank or to the custody. So that money is not available. The money in the South African Reserve Bank is not available in circulation. The money should be given into the circulation or to commercial banks so that it can be available in circulation for spending. The banks then have less money to lend and cannot extend as much as credit as before. If ever the Reserve Bank have collected money from the circulation by selling banks paper assets or bonds, that will lead to less money flowing in the economy, and commercial banks cannot afford to give more credit in the economy, and then that will decrease the spending. However, if the Reserve Bank buy bonds or paper assets from commercial banks, that will lead to money given back into the circulation, which will increase money supply into the economy and result to commercial banks giving more money into circulation as what? As loans into the society. That will stimulate aggregate demand or expenditure within the economy. To encourage credit creation, South African Reserve Bank will buy securities in the open market. The money flow back into the banking system and into the economy, which will lead to more spending. And banks will always use cash to create credit. The money they receive from Reserve Bank as they borrow at times, they use that one to create even more money, which is credit. And then this is believed to be a quantitative easing, because now the Reserve Bank is making money to be more available in the society by buying bonds from commercial banks, because the money is given back into the circulation or into the economy. And then moral suasion or moral persuasion or moral pressure or credit control. We know that South African Reserve Bank will always persuade or instruct commercial banks to behave in the manner that is desirable for current economic conditions that are prevailing at time. So, if the economy is doing very good to the point that it will lead to inflation, Reserve Bank will instruct commercial banks to be very strict when giving out credit. They don't have to be too much lenient. They need to be strict and tighten moral persuasion or moral suasion. But if the economy is doing bad, there is less money circulation and less spending in the economy, Reserve Bank will instruct commercial banks to be very much lenient and ease moral pressure or moral persuasion to allow more credit creation. We know that people are always tempted to spend as they have more money. They spend the money they don't even have within the banking or economic system. So, if banks are generous on extending credit, the South African Reserve Bank called them to be less lenient. However, simultaneously, it can sell paper in the market and drain excess liquidity so that banks have less money. So, besides giving them instruction, the Reserve Bank can simply sell paper assets to these commercial banks so that it will drain liquidity or cash from the circulation, which will lead to less money supply in the economy, and there will be less demand on goods and services. Credit creation results to consumer spending money they don't even have. That stimulates the aggregate demand. And then we move to fiscal measures now, the fiscal approach. We know that fiscal policy is driven or controlled by the Department of Finance in South Africa. And then it aims to facilitate the government political and economic objectives. The government can use fiscal policy to change taxes and government spending, which can stimulate or inhibit economic growth and development. So the state uses two instruments, taxes and government spending. The use of these policies can either be expansionary or contractionary. But to stimulate economic growth, it should be expansionary to ensure that taxes are being reduced so that there will be more disposable income and expenditure in the economy, which goes together with the increased aggregate demand. And then, if it's government spending, it should be increased to create enough opportunities in the economy through infrastructure development, transfers, etc. That will stimulate aggregate demand in the economy. Fiscal policy focuses on budget deficits and surpluses to increase or decrease aggregate demand. The general objective of demand management is to maintain aggregate demand so that it is not too low or not too high. South African national budget is the main tool to drive fiscal policy and implement fiscal policy through the following. Progressive tax system. Remember, we said progressive tax system occurs when high income earners are being taxed more than low income earners. and the whole of this money is used, or the whole of these revenues received through this taxation are used to benefit the poor in the economy. So the high income earners are taxed higher rates, while lower income earners are taxed less. These taxes are used to finance social developments. The poor benefit more than those who earn higher income from social allowances. That is the progressive tax system. And then we go further to wealth taxes. So properties such as houses, offices, and factories in urban areas are taxed annually. So the government simply takes them wealth taxes. Transfer duties. These are duties that are paid on the purchase or the sale of the property. Whenever an individual is buying the property, then there should be a transfer duty that is paid. Capital gains tax, that is CGT, levied on gains earned on the sale of capital goods such as property or shares. And then we know that shares and bonds are taxed when they are being traded by the government. All of these are the part of the wealth taxes. Taxes are used to finance expenditure that benefits the poor. So all of these tax revenues that are gained here are used in a form of redistribution by the government under the government expenditure to benefit the poor in the economy. The cash benefits. So in this case, we talk about all of those transfers made by the government to the society for the social security. Old age pensions, disability grants, child support grants, and unemployment insurance are important cash grants that are given by the state to improve social welfare. These are also known as social security payments. Then we continue benefits in kind. In this case, we refer to the provision of those free resources or services by the state to the society, such as education, the provision of proper healthcare, etc. So, provision of healthcare, education, school meals, protection, and municipal services and infrastructure. These are known as benefits in kind because some people are accessing these free of charge, and then while other people are paying for them, but they are paying user charges. Where a user fee is charged, poor people and low-income earners benefit more than others because they either pay nothing or pay less than higher income earners for these benefits. Limited quantities of free water and electricity is provided by the state. This ensures the standard of living of the marginalized people is improved. By making the provision of these public goods and services for free or with user charges, this improved the living standard for country's inhabitants. Other redistribution. Some macroeconomic policies have advantages that favor the poor. Public work programs provide employment and strategic integrated projects, which are SIPs, provide employment subsidies and other cash benefits such as training, financing, and export incentives to small, micro, and medium enterprises. Expanded public work programs improve skill development and infrastructure in disadvantaged areas where there's a high level of unemployment and poverty. So it is there to improve the standard of living for those people to attain skill that can be used even in future when contracts have lapsed. So it is there to alleviate poverty. Previously, marginalized people received preference in these projects. Land restitution and land redistribution. The purpose of land restitution is to return land or pay cash compensation to those people that lost their land forcefully. Land redistribution focuses on giving back land for either residential purposes or productive use within the society. The aim is to redistribute about 30% of agricultural land for previous disadvantaged people in the society so that they can plant and live better. The money for redress is planned through the main budget in the country. So it's budgeted for by the government to ensure that the land restitution and land redistribution is successfully taking place in the country. Property subsidies. These are subsidies or financial support given by the government to low-income earners to afford to own the property. So subsidies help beneficiaries to acquire ownership of fixed residential property. The government's housing subsidy schemes provide funding options to all eligible persons earning less than 3,500 per month. The money for this scheme comes from the main budget. We also know that the private sector is playing a huge role in there by providing or making funds available or loans in terms of bonds available to those people that are willing to buy houses or private property. Different approach. A different approach includes the following: increasing production. We know that if ever the production is increases, it creates a huge desire for labor force, so people will be employed. And increasing production of goods and services lead to increasing disposable income for people. So if people are employed, then there will be more income available. Increased production can be a result of government spending, high investment spending by business, and high exports. The government fiscal policy. The government can reduce income taxes or indirect taxes. So it can either be income tax or which is direct tax or indirect taxes such as excise duties on liquor and cigarettes. That can lead to increased demand in the economy because it leads to more disposable income or more real income. Government monetary policy. By reducing interest rates, the cost of credit is lowered. Household can now afford to borrow more money, increasing disposable income and consumption spending. So we know that if ever interest rates are being lowered by the Reserve Bank, that can simply lead to what? It can lead to more money available and more credit affordability in the economy. As a result, people will be demanding more goods and services in the economy. The government programs to satisfy basic needs. The government can assist poor households to satisfy their basic needs, such as clean water, healthcare, economic growth, and economic development. Investment spending by firms. We know that if businesses are investing, that have a spillover effect to the society because it leads to job creation. And also we know that if businesses are spending in the economy, that is good for capital formation of the country, which is known as investment. So investments in factory buildings, machines, and tools, that is called the capital formation or the gross capital formation. These investments increase the production capacity of businesses and in the economy. So if ever these investments are increasing, there will be more production in the economy. Investment lead to reduce unemployment. So if firms are investing directly, so there will be more job opportunities created in the economy, which will contribute to economic development of the country as well as economic growth. Because under development, poverty will be alleviated due to the fact that people will be receiving income, which will lead to them demanding more goods and services. The government invests in infrastructure development such as transport and communication in support of firms for them to simply prosper as they do their economic activities. The government spending in the economy. The government plans its expenditure on public services and economic affairs to ensure economic growth. So when the government conduct government spending, we all know that results to the increase in the economic performance because people will be getting job opportunities. There will be more disposable income in the economy. There will be some tenderships, and then that will lead to spending or increased aggregate demand in the economy. The government further plans its social expenditure on socio-economic aspects such as poverty. So the government also plans to alleviate poverty, especially focuses on those underdeveloped areas where there is a high level of unemployment and poverty. Also focus on marginalized groups so that those people can be able to afford their basic living. The Public Work Program, EPWP, is used to address the problem of unemployment in low-income earners. Examples include road construction, road maintenance, and low-cost housing. So those are built through EPWP projects to give people skills to alleviate poverty and also to reduce unemployment, even though it is temporary. We continue the different approach. Imports. We know that imports are very important because with imports, we tend to have those choices as consumers. So it provides variety of choices for consumers in terms of goods and services. The wider choice of consumer goods leads to economic development as consumers can access more choices in the economy in terms of goods and services. That is believed to be economic development because there is a freedom of choice in there. Imports also provide essential capital goods. We know that as a country, we don't have most of capital goods, so we depend on imported capital goods. So it is very important. And also intended goods are provided through importation of goods and services such as machinery, equipment, chemicals, petroleum products, and VAT spares. So all of these are the part of importation. So we cannot drive away imports and say they are less important because they are leakages. They are very important because without some of them, the country cannot afford to produce some goods and services because we are very much dependent. We lack to produce our own capital goods for the sake of economic growth and development. So we are very much dependent in foreign countries. An increase in economic growth leads to an increase in imports and deficit on BOP. Yes, if ever there is economic growth in the economy, that will lead to people having more income to spend. As they spend, they create a desire to demand imported goods. They demand goods from abroad, which will lead to the deficit in the current account, the deficit in the balance of payments account. So that is having that negative effect. If there is more economic growth, consumers will demand more goods and services. As they demand goods and services, they even demand imported goods because maybe local markets cannot provide those goods and services because of supply constraints. As a result, imports will increase and that will lead to imports being more than exports. As a result, we come across the deficit in our balance of payments, especially in the current account. The exports. Exports are part of the domestic demand as they earn extra income for the nation abroad. We know that after exporting goods and services, we have export earnings that flow back into the country to improve economic development and the economic growth of the country. So they are very important because they earn us the foreign currency, they earn us as a country net export, which is the income earned from the rest of the world through exportation of goods and services. Our exports are used to pay for countries' imports, contributing to increasing economic growth and to control the balance of payment of the country. We know that if exports are increasing, we tend to have more inflows into the economy, and our trade deficit tend to be reduced under the current account. And our current account deficit can also be reduced because of the increase in the level of exported goods and services. Government actions to promote exports include trade agreements with other world countries, maintaining the realistic exchange rate, and providing export incentives through the export promotion policy. That's how the government tries to ensure that it supports exportation of goods and services with the purpose of reducing the deficit and also trying to improve our balance of payment of the country. So this graph indicates the change in demand. After we have influenced positively the demand side approach, this is what is going to happen at the end. We see we have aggregate supply original and aggregate demand. And then after that, both of them are creating the equilibrium point at Q and P. So our EP is equilibrium price, our EQ is equilibrium quantity. Remember, vertical axis have a price and horizontal is quantity. And then because of using demand side approach positively, trying to stimulate aggregate demand, that simply lead to the rightward shift of the demand curve. So we come across AD shifting to AD1 positively to the right, which automatically have a certain effect or inflationary effect because the supply side approach has not been used. It remains flat and constant. So the quantity supplied remains at Q while the quantity demanded will be increasing to Q1. So because of that, the demand increases faster than the supply in the economy. So this creates an inflationary effect. Then we come across prices increasing from P to P1 because now the demand is more than the supply. We can see that the demand is at D1 and the supply is not at AS1, but it remains at AS. And the quantity demanded increases more than the quantity supplied because the quantity demanded is Q1 and the quantity supplied is Q. That creates the new equilibrium point, which is E1. This happens if we only influence the demand side approach without the nature of the demand side approach and the supply side approach. So this is the graph explanation. The same graph comes in, and then in the graph above, aggregate supply is known as AS, that is upward sloping. We can see it is up there. It's upward sloping. And then we have AD, which is the original demand curve, being downward sloping from the top left to the bottom right. And then we have E as original equilibrium. There is E as original equilibrium. And then P is equilibrium price and Q is equilibrium quantity. We see P and Q. And then the demand side approach stimulate aggregate demand and shift AD to AD1. The quantity demanded increases to Q1 while the price increases to P1. And then we continue with the graph explanation. The supply constraints remain unchanged since S remains at AS. So it doesn't change. So the supply remains constant. If actually demand 80 increased to 81, price will be increasing, causing the inflation effect. Since demand increases faster than the supply, we can see the demand is 81 now, but the supply remains constant at AS. So this is causing inflationary effect because the demand is increasing more than the supply. This is only okay if the mixture of both demand side and supply side is not implemented simultaneously. And then this is the assessment. Section A, which is the multiple choice. Improvement of social infrastructure, human resource development, and variety of choices for citizens is regarded as, then these are options: economic growth, economic development, economic stability, and equalities. Let's look at the answer in here. And our answer is economic development, because this is improvement of social welfare, including infrastructure, etc. And then the next statement, economic growth is measured through, what do we use to measure economic growth? Is it economic development? Is it per capita income? Is it life expectancy? Is it real GDP? Let's see at our options. Which answer is correct? Economic development is wrong. Per capita income is wrong. Life expectancy is wrong. But real GDP is correct. That gives you 2 marks. And then nominal GDP is converted to real GDP by A, removing inflation, B, adding inflation, C, adding taxes, D, adding interest rates. And then our answer is next. Our answer is answer number A there, which is removing inflation effect. And then the next slide, still on section A. Tax system used when high income earners are taxed more than low income earners is called regressive, aggressive, progressive, and discriminatory. Let's see the correct answer there. When high income earners are taxed more than low income earners, A is wrong, B is wrong, but C is correct because that's a progressive tax system. And then now we go to section B. This is a lower order that needs you to remember. Mention any 2 measures of economic development. Then we can list 4. Life expectancy, income per capita or GDP per capita, standard of living, as well as education or adult literacy. And then we continue with the lower order under section B. Mention any 2 redress policies implemented in South Africa. That is for 2 marks. Land reform, land restitution, land redistribution, broad-based black economic empowerment, Employment Equity Act. And then we continue. Lower order again in section B. Mention any 2 monetary policy instruments. We mentioned 4 of them. Repo rate or repurchase rate. One can even say interest rate. Cash reserve requirement or reserve requirement ratio. Open market transaction, as well as moral suasion or moral persuasion or credit control. Then make the order questions in section B. How can the increase in personal income tax affect aggregate demand? If ever the income tax is increasing, how can that affect the demand in the economy? The increase in the personal income tax decreases the disposable income for households. This can result to the decrease in aggregate demand in the economy. We know that if ever there is more income tax, that will lead to people having less disposable income, therefore they will demand less goods and services. What will be the effect if aggregate demand increases faster than the aggregate supply? We know that if the demand increases more than the supply, that will create inflation. So the prices will be increasing significantly, leading to inflation. We continue. How does increased government spending affect aggregate demand? We know that if ever the government spending is increasing, that create enough opportunities in the economy, which include employment opportunities. Therefore, people will be receiving income, and then the demand in the economy will be increasing. Higher order question, section B. Why would the government focus on SMMEs to drive the economy? 8 marks. The small business sector employs a large part of the labor force compared to the other side of businesses. The average capital cost of job created in the SME sector is lower than in the big business sector. It allows it allows for more competitive markets where consumers will benefit from wider variety of goods and services to choose from, and which can lead even to lower prices. It can adapt more rapidly than larger organizations in changing preferences and trends. So if ever SMMEs are in place, they are quickly to respond to consumer demand and those changes in the economy because they are not decentralized in terms of decision making. We continue. Often local resources are used, which has a ripple effect in the development of other industries. It provides opportunities for aspiring entrepreneurs, especially those who are unemployed, underemployed, or retrenched. Workers at the smaller end and the scale often require limited or no skills or training. They learn on the job. Under SMMEs, they don't mainly focus on skills owned by an individual and experience. People learn throughout the job. Subcontracting by large enterprises to SMMEs lends expansion to production processes. It plays a vital role in the technical and other innovations which can lead to a successful, highly qualified and competitors in the future. And then this is section C, which is our essay from November 2018. And the same essay, which is the main part, was also asked. It came out in the June examination NSC. Discuss demand-side approach in detail to promote economic growth, 26 marks. Evaluate the success of expanded public work program to reduce poverty and unemployment, 10 marks. Let's look at the essay. So first, we know that we follow the IMEC. Introduction, the body main part, additional part, as well as conclusion. So the first one will be the introduction, whereby there will be a description of the demand-side approach. The demand-side approach involved discretionary changes in the monetary and fiscal policies, with the aim of changing the levels of aggregate demand, 2 marks. This is an approach that focuses on the aggregate demand created by household, business, and government, 2 marks. Any other correct relevant response was given 2 marks. And then the monetary approach. Monetary policy is driven by South African Reserve Bank. It is used to influence interest rates and the money supply in the economy to stabilize the price level. The monetary policy approach consists of decisions by the central bank as part of monetary authorities to influence interest rate and the money supply in the economy by implementing inflation targeting set by the government. The central bank manages the availability of money by means of open market transaction, cash reserve requirement, moral persuasion, as well as interest rates. Controlling repo rate. This has been covered before in the lesson. So it is the repeat of the same information. It's just that this one is an assessment itself now from the previous question paper. The effect of the interest rate that commercial banks can offer for 2 purposes: to influence credit creation by making credit more expensive or cheap, and also stabilize the exchange rate by encouraging capital inflows and outflows in order to take care of deficit or surpluses on the current account of the balance of payment of the country. Interest rates are directed by changes in repurchase rate or repo rate. Conducting open market transaction. So remember, your subheadings are 1 mark, and then you go to the content itself is 2 marks if it's a full explanation. To restrict bank credit, South African Reserve Bank sells securities, and when the banks buy these securities, money flows from banks to South African Reserve Bank. So that one is very much restrictive because money is taken back from the circulation to the central bank. The banks then have less money to lend and cannot extend as much as credit as possible as before, because now the money has been collected by the state or by the Reserve Bank into the custody. To encourage credit creation, South African Reserve Bank buys securities in the open market from commercial banks. That will lead to money supply flowing back into the economy. And if money flows back into the economy, banks will be creating more credit and giving money into the circulation. That will lead to more demand on goods and services. We all know that banks will always use cash to create the credit. This process is referred as the quantitative easing. Moral persuasion or moral suasion. The South African Reserve Bank consult with commercial banks and persuade them to act in a manner that is desirable in terms of economic conditions that prevail at time. The persuasion is often linked to transaction by South African Reserve Bank in the money market, e.g., buying and selling of bonds within the economy. If the banks are generous in extending credit, the Reserve Bank will call them and instruct them to be less lenient when offering credit into the society or into the economy. However, simultaneously, it can also do what? It can also sell paper into the market to drain cash or liquidity from the circulation to reduce the money supply in the economy. Credit creation results to consumers spending money they don't even have that stimulate the aggregate demand in the economy. And then the fiscal approach. So it goes back again. We know that the fiscal policy is controlled by the Department of Finance in South Africa or in the country. It aims to facilitate government political and economic objectives. Government can use what we call the fiscal policy in a form of taxation and the government expenditure to stimulate or hamper economic growth. Fiscal policy focuses on budget deficits and surpluses to increase or decrease aggregate demand. It is there to influence aggregate demand. That's why we say fiscal policy is demand side driven. The general objective of demand management is to maintain aggregate demand so that it is not too low or too high in the economy. We continue with the fiscal approach. South African government is using the following aspects to drive the demand. We talk of progressive tax system, which is when high income earners are taxed more than low income earners, and this income received in a form of revenues benefit underprivileged or the poor more than those people that are privileged in the economy through social allowances. Wealth taxes, we talk about taxes that is imposed by the state on the purchase or the sale of houses, offices, factories in the urban areas, which are taxed annually. Transfer duties are paid when properties are bought. Whenever an individual is buying the property, the transfer duty is payable. The capital gains tax, this is the tax which is imposed levied on gains and on the sale of capital goods such as property and shares. Shares and bonds are taxed as they are traded in the open market. Taxes are used to finance expenditure that benefit the poor the most in the economy. We continue cash benefits. In this case, we talk about all social allowances that are transferred by the government to reduce inequalities and also reduce poverty in the society. It's all about old age pension, child support grant, care dependency, etc. We can count all grants that are given by the government in the economy to reduce inequalities and also reduce poverty. These are also known as social security payments that are given by the state. Benefits in kind. In this case, we talk about the provision of public goods, which can be collective or community goods. Some of them are believed to be free riders in the society because people are not paying anything for them. But during this the provision of these goods and services, the poor benefit the most because they either pay less for those that are having user charges or they pay nothing at all. So limited quantities of free water and electricity is made available by the state to the society or for those people that are underprivileged. Other redistribution talks to some macroeconomic policies have an advantage that favor the poor in the economy. We talk about the public work programs as well as a strategic integrated project that provides skills and employment to the underprivileged people so that they can become productive. Also, it's also provide cash benefits to SMMEs or small, micro, and medium enterprises in the economy for them to grow and employ more people in the economy. Expanded public work programs are always in place in underprivileged areas with the aim of reducing poverty and unemployment. So people are able to acquire skills that can be used at the end of those projects for self-employment opportunities. So this benefits the most previously disadvantaged people or marginalized people in the economy. Land redistribution and land restitution. Remember that if we talk about land restitution, we refer to the compensation given by the state to people that lost their land forcefully through discriminatory laws. And then land restitution refers to giving back land to the society for the sake of settlement or residential or productive use. So the government aims at making sure that land is provided back to the people at least is 30%. And then we know that the money for this is budgeted for in the main budget of the country that always takes place on the last week of February. Property subsidies. In this case, we talk about the financial support given by the government to encourage ownership of fixed property in the society. So low-income earners are privileged to receive 3,500 per month. I mean, those people that are earning less than 3,500 per month are privileged to earn or to receive the property subsidy from the government that is planned on the main budget. Also, even government workers are receiving a certain income as a part of a housing subsidy so that they can be able to afford to buy or purchase properties. We also know that the private sector is responsible by making sure that it provides loans in a form of bonds to those people that require to buy houses. And then other approaches, we talk about the production, increasing production. We know that if ever the production is increasing, that will lead to what? Increased disposable income in the economy for consumers. Then people will be demanding more goods and services. Increased production can be a reason for increased government spending, high investment by businesses, and high exports or high exported goods and services. And then government policy. In that case, government, we know that government can intervene by reducing taxation, or which can either be direct tax or indirect tax, income tax or indirect tax. That can simply lead to what? It can lead to more disposable income, more spending on goods and services, or more real income in the economy. The different approach, the government policy. So the government can intervene through monetary policy, which in this case is South African Reserve Bank, by reducing interest rate to encourage more money supply in the economy. We know that if interest rates are lowered, that will automatically toward the credit becoming more affordable and cheap in the economy. As a result, people will be borrowing more money from commercial banks and spend in the economy, and that will increase aggregate demand. Government programs to satisfy basic needs. In this case, we talk about the government intervening to assist the poor to satisfy their basic needs through the provision of clean water, healthcare, to ensure that economic growth and development is well achieved. And then we talk about investment spending by firms. In this case, we refer to investments on inventory, buildings, machines, and tools, which are called the capital formation in the nation. The investment of this investment increase production capacity in the economy and attract more employment opportunities in the economy. Investment lead to reduce unemployment, which contribute to economic growth and development. The government can invest in infrastructure development such as transport and communication to support businesses to prosper and to provide their goods and services into the market easily without any constraint. The government spending. The government plans its expenditure on public services and economic growth affairs to ensure economic growth. The government further plans its social expenditure on socio-economic aspects such as poverty. So the government main aim is to ensure that the poverty is alleviated in the society. EPWP, the government also spent on providing projects like EPWP into the economy, expanded public work programs to ensure that people in underprivileged areas are getting an opportunity to receive income and get those skills too in order to reduce poverty and unemployment. Examples include road construction, road maintenance, and low-cost housing. The imports. Imports are important into South African economy because they provide variety of choices for consumers. The wider choices of goods and services made available because of import, and that is known as to be economic development for those people. Imports also provide very important goods and services such as capital goods or machinery, so that our local firms can be able to produce goods and services, which include machinery, equipment, chemicals, petroleum products, and vehicle spares. An increase in economic growth lead to increase in imports, which lead to the deficit in the balance of payment that has been explained before. The exports. Exports are the part of domestic demand as they earn extra income for the country after goods have been paid for abroad. And our exports are used to pay for imported goods and services, contributing to increasing economic growth and control the balance of payment of the country. The government actions to promote exports include trade agreements, maintaining a realistic exchange rate, and providing an export incentive through export promotion policy. And then the additional part of the essay. Expanded public work program reduce poverty and unemployment by the following. Focusing more on previous disadvantaged groups, ensuring that measures are implemented to ensure redress and affirmative action in the workplace and businesses and the business environment. Improving the social benefits to the community, e.g., health issues can be resolved. Improving the standard of living by changing the worker's outlook in life to be able to satisfy more wants. We continue with the additional part of the essay. Creating employment opportunities for the poor and vulnerable by using labor-intensive methods to be able to accommodate as many people as possible. We remember that EPWP are labor-intensive. Giving people skills, one of those objectives. Giving people skills that they can use to find jobs when their work in the EPWP is done. Building future entrepreneurial abilities through SMMEs. We know that these EPWP projects are given to SMMEs the most to contribute in solving major unemployment problem in the country. Maximum there was 10 marks. And then we go to the conclusion of the essay. Remember, your conclusion should be the higher order response, should not be the lower order or middle order. It should not repeat any information mentioned in the body of the essay or additional part. Should be the critical aspect where you become more authentic and critical and you argue. You provide the solution of the problem. Sustainable economic growth and development in a country is not a given unless the government applies strict and effective policies to manage the economy. So this was more about the conclusion of the essay. So any other correct and relevant response was given 2 marks. So if you provide any response here that is correct and relevant, it gives you 2 marks. Now, let's provide the summary of the lesson. Remember, we started by describing economic growth and development. Now, we said economic growth is achieved if there is increase in the productive capacity of the country. So if ever in the country we come across increased production of goods and services, we can say that is economic growth. And then if ever economic activities are increasing in the country, we can say we are likely to achieve economic growth. So remember, economic growth is very important because it leads to economic development. As much as the government receives more revenues, the government can be able to easily spend in the economy by providing infrastructure, providing social transfers, building both economic and social infrastructure, which will be a part of economic development. So it is very important for the country to achieve economic growth so that it can even avoid borrowing money from foreign countries in order to improve its own infrastructure. However, we emphasized that it is not always guaranteed that if there is economic growth, there will always be economic development. But we know that economic growth leads to economic development because there must be money available for the country in order for it to be able to spend and redistribute into the economy for the sake of economic development. So we spoke about economic growth trends of South Africa, saying the economic growth have been declining in South Africa, have not been very much positive. As much as the country has been setting some targets using different policies to say it wants to achieve 6% growth in the economy, but it has not been easy for the country to achieve that economic growth. The main challenge that we are facing in that is the fact that our local firms are still in firms, they have less capacity to produce, and our economy is failing to attract as much as possible foreign direct investors. So with that happening in the economy, it is difficult for us to have effective economic growth because our firms are having less capacity. They are infant industries or infant businesses, and also in that case, foreign direct investors are very much pessimistic to invest in South African economy. So that alone creates some constraints. So looking at economic development, we said is the improvement of social welfare, improvement of standard of living for people, and improvement of well-being of those countries' inhabitants. So to have economic development, that means there must be money available and spent by the government in the country. So the money being spent by the government through the government spending will be used to improve either the infrastructure or to improve human capital or human resource development. Also improve all facilities important for businesses to prosper in the economy. All those facilities important for people to live better life in the economy. We spoke about measures of economic development saying it's life expectancy, income per capita, also education level, as well as standard of living. We know that standard of living is well informed by what? It is well informed by the level of employment and access to basic needs in the society. And then we spoke about the demand side approach, emphasizing that the demand side approach is mainly focusing on the fiscal policy, monetary policy, and other approaches or other measures. So the demand side approach is mainly focusing on stimulating or influencing the aggregate demand. So to increase the demand, the Reserve Bank and the government should apply a monetary policy in the manner that it expands or increases money supply in the economy, meaning it's an expansionary monetary policy. by reducing interest rate, which will allow more credit creation in the economy, more money supply, and more demand on goods and services. So in this case, we talk about repo rate. If it's being reduced, that will lead to the prime rate being reduced and all other interest rates being reduced. Because of that, there will be more credit availability in the economy. And then as a result, borrowings will be increasing, then money supply is increasing in the economy. That is MS. Because of more money supply, the aggregate demand will be increasing rapidly, meaning people will be demanding more goods and services because of the fact that repo rate has been reduced. Through that aggregate demand increasing, that will lead to more production, and then because of that, the gross value added, GVA per industry, will be increasing, and then GDP will be increasing, and then economic growth will also be increasing in the economy. So we have achieved it. Because of what? Because of applying expansionary monetary policy under repurchase rate. Or let's say we talk about the cash reserves or reserve requirement ratio. If ever it's being reduced, that means that the Reserve Bank is trying to increase the liquidity in the economy. Commercial banks will be depositing less money into the Reserve Bank on their revenues. So that will lead to money supply being increased or being at the high level in the, what we call, in the circulation. So commercial banks will be having more money, and then the credit creation will be increasing. Because of that, that will lead to what? More aggregate demand. We know that if demand is increasing, the rest of these aspects will be happening in the economy, including economic growth. And then open market transaction, that is OMT. We call this open market operation in other concept. So this is when the government, the Reserve Bank, will either sell or buy bonds. So to stimulate economic growth and increase the demand, what should be done? The Reserve Bank need to buy. The Reserve Bank must buy financial securities from commercial banks. As the Reserve Bank buy, there will be more liquidity. So money supply will be increasing because the money will be taken from the custody and given back into the commercial bank or into the system. As a result, that will lead to increased aggregate demand in the economy. So, with this being done, we all know with this happening, we will always come across the stimulated aggregate demand and increased economic growth. And then we talk about the moral persuasion or moral pressure. So what happens in this case? Under moral persuasion, we know that the Reserve Bank will always instruct commercial bank to act in a manner that is desirable for current economic condition. Therefore, as a result, under moral persuasion, they will have to relax or ease moral persuasion, meaning making sure that the credit is easily created in the economy. We know that if ever there is more credit creation, people will always spend the money they don't even have. As a result, this will lead to the increased aggregate demand in the economy. This is under credit control. And then we go to the fiscal policy. The government mainly deal with the taxation and government spending. So if not taxation, there will be spending in a form of redistribution. Any income received through taxation by the government is redistributed back into the economy. As the money is being redistributed, it is there to benefit the poor or marginalized people in the economy. So taxes, any kind of taxation that the government can use. Remember, in South Africa, we use the progressive tax system. So any kind of tax that the government can use. If the government can reduce taxation, let's say we talk of the direct tax, that can lead to businesses paying less corporate tax and workers or households paying less what you call pay-as-you-earn or direct tax or income tax. As a result, that will lead to increased disposable income. If tax is being reduced, so disposable income will be increasing. We know that if we have income, we are always tempted to spend. So AD will then be increasing. The rest will okay. What about the indirect tax? If the state reduces indirect tax, what will happen? If indirect tax is being reduced, so indirect tax is being reduced, what will happen? So that will lead to increased real income. If real income increases, that means we are affording more goods and services in the economy. That will push producers to produce more goods and services, and then there will be a GDP increase as well as economic growth. And then all other taxes that are imposed by the government generate the state revenues, and those revenues are used by the state in a form of redistribution into the economy, and also providing the infrastructure, and also ensuring that we have economic growth and development, even also job creation, but it benefits the poor more than benefiting those people that are privileged in the economy, because some of poor people or underprivileged people access basic needs or community goods as well as collective goods free of charge, or they pay less for them. We know that community goods are free of charge, so we don't pay for them. But collective goods, those that are paying user charges, they pay even less. At times, they pay nothing depending on the level of economic development in that particular area. So, underprivileged people benefit the most from this distribution and these revenues that are redistributed by the government back into the society. And then, also on this, we talk about other measures that are used by the government to ensure that redistribution take place and the poor benefit the most and benefit more than those who are rich. Then we focus on the following. In the same situation, we have C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So in this case, we talk about consumption spending, which is always leading to higher production in the economy and result to the greater employment opportunities and reduce unemployment. Investment spending by the business, if ever they invest the most in the economy, what happens? It attracts employment opportunities and people get jobs and afford to pay for their basic needs because they earn income. The increase in government spending have an effect of increasing the multiplier effect in the economy and job creation. Because of that improve economic growth and economic development of the country, because as the government spends its income, it spends its income either creating jobs through infrastructure programs. So the infrastructure will be improved and people will be living better life because they are also receiving income through improving this infrastructure. And then export earnings, we know that after exporting goods and services, we earn income from those exports, which is known as net export earnings. Because of that, the income will be flowing into the country. As the income flow in, what happens into the country? The income will be flowing in as an injection, then the income can be used to reinvest in the economy and improve standard of living, which will even further economic growth of the country. And then the imports. Imports are very important as much as they become leakages, but they are very important because they provide a variety of goods and services for our local consumers. Because of that, economic development is well improved because of availability of imports, because consumers find themselves having the freedom of choice. At the same time, imports are very important because as a country, we don't have all capital goods that we desire to produce goods and services. We therefore depend on imported goods and services into the country. So those are the likes of capital goods, technology, etc. that are very important for our industries to be productive. Without these imports, we cannot be able to produce goods and services because we are less innovative and less creative to produce these machines, which are necessary for us to transform our natural resources into final goods. So those are the aspects of the demand side approach. Otherwise, our lesson is ending here. With all of this being said, I believe our lesson will have a great impact as we prepare for upcoming preparatory examination. Remember that you need to train yourself to the sense that you take all of our sections, section A and section B and section C, take them very much important. Do not undermine any section. Section A is very important because it gives you 30 marks. You cannot simply get those marks for free. You must work for. Be able to analyze and eliminate in section A so that you can get correct answers. That your what you call your definitions for you to be able to respond in section A. Avoid guessing in section A. Going to section B, also in section A before I leave in there, ensure that you don't leave unattended responses in there. Ensure that you answer all questions. Going to section B, you need to train yourself. You know that we have middle order questions, higher order, including the lower order questions. Those lower order questions are for you to ensure that even if you are facing difficulties, you can be able to grab some marks and go on. Those middle order questions also accommodate you to be able to accumulate your score or your marks as you approach your 150 question paper. So ensure that you don't leave anything unattended. Avoid choosing the question just because you see that 2.1.1 is easy. You need to use the 10 minutes reading time very much efficient by choosing questions according to marks that you believe you will achieve. It is very important to also look at your data response questions and see if you are familiar with those data response questions and as well as be able to look down the at a middle order and higher order question in 2.4, 2.5, 3.4, 3.5, 4.4, 4.5. Choose according to those aspects. Don't just choose the question because you see that you have 1 mark. That creates a problem because you find yourself answering all questions in the question paper because we are trying to answer what you know. No, choose according to the instructions. And then after that, choose questions in there according to what you know. And then be able to answer your questions in full sentences where it desire 2 marks going up. Do not list because listing will make you to forfeit some marks in the question paper. In the essay, we know that you have been taught the most to start with the essay when you are writing your examination. Remember that section A is 30 marks. The difference between section A and section C is that section C is 40 marks, so the difference is only 10 marks. And then section B, you keep on focusing on section A and neglect section B, only to find that section B is 80 marks. So it is very important for you to treat all sections equally. Avoid giving a priority in a particular section because all of these marks matter and they are very much important for you. If you focus on section C, you spend an hour writing an essay which worth 40 marks. You are wasting your time because now, after writing an essay, maybe that essay you are writing, you are even writing the wrong essay. Because some of you are not reading instructions or question statement thoroughly. You simply peruse and answer the question with the early excitement. Avoid the early excitement. Ensure that you read the question statement thoroughly with understanding and plan your essay. If you start with your essay, avoid spending the rest of your time writing an essay because you will be writing only for how many marks? For 40 marks for that particular essay. So also read your instructions. Avoid writing extra questions in the examination because that steals your time and makes you to write quantity, not the quality of responses. Most of you are leaving additional part unattended in the section C. Avoid doing that because remember, if you see the essay, you find that you know the essay. No, you might not know the whole essay because remember, it is divided into 2 parts. You have your what you call your main part and an additional part in the body of your essay. So knowing the main part cannot guarantee you knowing the additional part because additional part is critical. And knowing nothing about the main part, maybe the essay came in, maybe you did not prepare yourself on it, but you might know the additional part. Therefore, it is impossible for you as a learner or the candidate to get 0 in an essay because we are giving various aspects, introduction for definition, that become easier for you. In the main part, that's when you provide your subheadings of the essay. For listing, you get 1 mark up to the maximum of 8, including examples. And then you go to the content. You can be able to describe those concepts that I have mentioned as subheadings. And then you go to the additional part of the essay. That's when you need to think. Remember, the responses there cannot be found easily in the textbook. You need to be critical and be able to evaluate either the success or the failure of some sort. And then that's when you need to apply your economic knowledge in there. Your economics knowledge must come out in there. And then remember, the memorandum in there is very much open to the point that if you make a sense on the question, you will be credited for the mark. So avoid leaving though that additional part being unattended because you forfeit marks unattendedly. Try to be familiar with the content. Read with understanding. Study for the sake of understanding because remember, our content is questioned in the sense that we don't only focus on the content knowledge, we also apply the most. Apply your knowledge, for which you use now your knowledge to evaluate and apply the content practically, for which sometimes is not the part of the content, is not in the content knowledge, is not in the textbook. You need to show that you know, you understand economics. So it's very important for whatever you do in economics, understanding must be the priority so that you can overtake and attack any question that is possible in the subject. With this, I thank you and I believe the lesson will assist you. Enjoy it.